Thank you so much, and what a great morning session. I can't say how inspired I am, despite the fact that everyone this morning was focusing somewhat on the problem. I certainly heard a lot of reasons for great hope, and especially if we have leaders who, even after they leave public office, are willing to continue that commitment. So let's please give them all a great big round of applause. You know, before I introduce our lunchtime panel and discussion, which you're really in for a great big treat, I want to say that in 2003, you may have heard there was a recall election here in California, and many of us ended up going to Sacramento to serve in the new government. Well, one of the people who left here in Southern California to go up there at that time said, "I'll be back." And of course, I'm referring to my dear friend, Bonnie Reese. Where is Bonnie? Give her a great big round of applause. The global director, there she is, way in the back in the red, the global director of the Institute here. I want to thank her for putting this together on such short notice, of course, with all of her colleagues, Nancy Stout and the others who were introduced this morning, but in particular for all of her energy, heart, and humor. Thank you, Bonnie. And of course, kidding aside, I do want to thank my good friend, Arnold Schwarzenegger. Give him a great big round of applause. This is another example of the fact that he really is an action hero. It's not just about talking about these things, but he's going to be heading up an effort here to work with students and faculty and to bring in the best and brightest from government, from technology, business, from finance, from every aspect of life to come up with the solutions and to inspire the students to be the ones to come up with the solutions. So a man of action once again, and we're so proud and I'm honored to be a part of the advisory team here and a small contributor to this success. And lastly, before I get into introducing our lunchtime speakers, I'd like to acknowledge and ask them to actually stand so you know where they are. The team from my group, 7th Generation Advisors, who are also the backbone of the R20 that the governor mentioned this morning, which is a subnational group that now brings together more than 500 states and provinces all over the globe that are tackling sustainability, that are tackling the issues of climate change, clean energy, energy efficiency, and how to make our world more sustainable going forward. They're sharing policy, they're sharing technology, and they're sharing finance. But once again, because Governor Schwarzenegger is the chair of that effort, it's all about action. So in the first year and a half, we've identified and helped to inspire over $1 billion of low-carbon economic development projects all over the world. And that's just a start. So for more information, I want you to know who you can go talk to. So I'd like to ask our R20 team to just stand for a moment, give them a round of applause. We have folks, our China director is there, our USA director is there, and of course our headquarters is in Geneva. So if you want more information about that and how they're going to be tying in to the Institute here, please seek them out. Well, today's discussion, as I said, I think you're in for a treat for some people who are not shy about giving their opinions and their ideas for solutions. You know, it's often cited that if everyone lived like an American, we would need 14 planet Earths and even far more planet Earths to store all the waste and pollution that result from our lifestyles. But the truth is, while the focus is on our consumption and on a lot of the way that we live in this country, it's true, we have a lot to learn, we also have a lot to teach, but now it's not just the US or the European Union. In China today, it's 1.3 billion people, about the same population as America, 350, 400 million, within that 1.3 billion, now live like Americans. They have cars, they have air conditioners, they have high-rises, they have appliances and so forth. So they are moving into this consumer class. The same thing is true in China, in India, I should say. Again, with about 1.3 billion in population and a very large growing middle class that all want to move into the kind of success and lifestyle that we enjoy here and in Europe. And in South America, out of the entire population of South America, there's another United States in terms of consumers on this planet. So we need to engage in the solutions. And this morning you heard about some of the barriers to those solutions in our country. Here at lunch today, you're going to hear about many of the solutions happening both in our country and globally. It's my pleasure to introduce our panelists, Dr. R.K. Pachauri, who is the Director General of the Energy and Resources Institute, or TERI, as the acronym spells out, which includes the TERI University, focused on sustainable energy, environment, forestry, and biotechnology. A man of great vision. He's also the chairman of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or the IPCC. And if that sounds familiar, he and the IPCC are the reason that that collar around your neck might start feeling a little tighter every 5 years when the IPCC issues its reports about the status of climate change and the way it's already affecting our planet. He was, of course, awarded the Nobel Prize on behalf of that work and the IPCC in 2007, the same year that Al Gore won his Nobel Prize for Peace. But when our moderator, who I'll introduce in a moment, was asking me, how do you address him? Is it Dr. Pachauri? Is it RK? Or like many of his friends call him, Patchy? I went back over his bio to figure out the best way to address him. And I guess since he won the Officer of the Legion of Honor, the Commander of the Order of Leopold II, the Commander of the Order of the White Rose, and the Order of the Rising Sun, and the Aztec Eagle, I don't know how you'd address him. But perhaps you'd address him as author and visionary, because he's the author of 26 books and many articles about the solutions to our global problems of sustainability. You're in for a real treat when you meet him. Our other panelist, and I shouldn't really say panel, this is going to be a lively conversation, is Mayor Bob Foster. And I've known Bob for many years because of his amazing work all the way back years ago at the Energy Commission. You know, we in the Schwarzenegger administration like to take a lot of credit for helping California become 40% more energy efficient than the rest of the United States. It's absolutely true. But actually, one of the original architects of that is Bob Foster, when he was at the Energy Commission coming up with the crazy notion back in the 1970s that maybe buildings could be more efficient and use less energy. And the success of those building efficiency standards led to appliance efficiency standards and lighting efficiency standards, and all of those things which up until even most recently now are being applied to flat panel TVs and you name it. Well, the original architect of that is with us today. He then went on to a very distinguished career at Southern California Edison, where you might think he'd sit back and clip coupons and just end up in happy retirement someday, but no. He spent a number of years at Southern California Edison, where he made Edison the entity that has now deployed more solar, geothermal, wind, and biomass energy than anywhere else in America. And finally, yes, that deserves a round of applause. And that, in turn, made possible some of the policies that we implemented that the governor mentioned this morning, the renewable policy, the renewable portfolio standard, and that type of thing. And then, of course, you'd think, well, all right, now he's done those two amazing things. Now he really will just retire to the golf course. No. He decided to go into public service and ran for mayor of Long Beach and has been elected to that post twice, where he has served with great distinction and proved that all local solutions actually can be implemented and become examples globally. Well, the person to facilitate the conversation with our two distinguished guests is Conan Nolan. Now, when I mentioned this to my nieces, one of them said, well, that's going to be a really funny panel then, if Conan is moderating that panel. And I said, no, not Conan O'Brien. And the other little niece said, well, will Conan be bringing the sword? And I said, no, that's Conan the Barbarian. This is Conan Nolan, who, if you don't already know, you should, because he's the host of News Conference, which is the longest-running and most influential political and public affairs program on Southern California television. And yes, give him a great big round of applause for that. It's very hard to do. He won an Emmy for his reports on child refugees in the Pakistani frontier and a Golden Mike Award for a report on the South Pacific island nation of Tuvalu, which many believe will be the first nation to disappear entirely to rising sea level as a result of climate change. So he knows a lot about climate change and about the topics today. For 25 years, of course, you've seen him on NBC4 connecting us to an amazing array of stories, but I promised him today that his topics would not be as elusive as when he was driving in front of O.J. Simpson's white Ford Bronco, or as hazardous as when he reported from the front lines of Kuwait and the Afghan border, nor as hard to believe as the stories he heard from his days in Sacramento. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Conan Nolan, Dr. R.K. Pachauri, and Mayor Bob Foster to the stage.
Terry, thank you very much for that introduction. It's great to be here, and it's an honor and privilege. Governor Schwarzenegger, thank you very much. Mr. President Nikias, thank you very much for having this event. I appreciate Terry's introduction. It reminds me of something LBJ once said. He was introduced, and they talked about what a wonderful statesman he was, a great senator from Texas, and he got up and he said, you know, I wish my parents were alive to hear that introduction. You know, my father would have loved it. My mother may have even believed it. And so it's great fun being here. We're going to start off, Dr. Pachauri, I'm going to have you start off here. Sure. It was mentioned earlier that the 5th assessment of climate control, climate change, is due out sometime in 2014. Give us your assessment on where we are, and is there any good news? Because if you look at the 4th assessment, there wasn't much good news when you made an assessment of that.
Well, the good news really is the fact that a lot of actions that are required to mitigate emissions of greenhouse gases are really very attractive. And there are huge co-benefits. For instance, if you reduce emissions of greenhouse gases, you also improve the local environment. So that brings about health benefits. You have higher levels of energy security. And there's a lot of evidence to show that you even generate more jobs. So I think it's really a question of looking at actions that need to be taken. And a lot of it is really good news. Now, it's entirely true that the impacts of climate change are going to become progressively worse. We brought out a special report last year on extreme events and disasters, and I just want to mention 2 facts over there. Heat waves are going to become more intense, more frequent. In fact, those heat waves which take place currently once in 20 years, by the end of the century, will occur once in 2 years. And there's also much greater evidence of extreme precipitation events. Even in those areas where you have an actual reduction in average rainfall, a large proportion of it will take place in the form of heavy falls. So, I mean, yes, there is bad news over there, but I hope that bad news doesn't create inertia in our actions and actually compels us to take the right kind of action. And, you know, those actions are really very attractive.
This is all about local solutions to global problems. There would be some who would, outside this tent, would look at that and say that's an oxymoron. You can't have a global solution, a local solution to a global problem. Mayor, you have an interesting pedigree in that you've been in energy all your life. Then all of a sudden you become mayor of a very large city. You have pension problems, you have budget problems, police and fire, filling potholes, yet wrapped in the California state flag.
I love it.
And the
I'll hold it down.
And the question is, we understand that oh my goodness. Round of applause for the mayor of Long Beach, that he survived that.
I don't know my own strength.
You know, I was going to actually ask you if you were going to run for governor, but I think since that flag fell on you, I might hold off.
Thank you for not asking that.
Talk to us about the port. One of the great accomplishments of your administration has been reducing the CO2 footprint from the Port of Long Beach.
Well, what we've done is we looked at the port as a great economic engine, but we also knew that it had a substantial environmental impact, not just to the surrounding community, but to, in fact, all of Southern California. It was the largest single source of pollution in Southern California. And we decided that we're going to take, in keeping with still having the port be a vibrant economic entity, we were going to change things. So what we did is we adopted a clean air action plan. We went after ships, we went after trucks, locomotives. We did that in a variety of ways. Ships cold iron now, a good number, not all of them, which means they're under electricity when they're hoteling at the port. We make sure they have vessel speed reductions so that now up to 40 miles out, they reduce speeds, dramatically reducing their fuel consumption and their emissions. Locomotives have been changed over, and probably the single most difficult thing was changing out the entire fleet of trucks. You had about 14 to 15,000 trucks that were frequent flyers at the port. And we adopted a ratcheting program where every year, every other year, over about a 8-year period, you had to have a cleaner, a newer truck, a later model truck. So we started out where if you were 1994 and later, you could not visit the port. Then it went all the way up to 2001. Today, it's now 2007. Now, we thought that would take the entire time we put this plan together, we thought it would take 7 or 8 years. We actually turned that fleet of trucks over in about 2 years. And remarkable accomplishment. We did a lot of it with private sector. They stepped up and said, well, thank you. Give credit to the private sector because they saw the wisdom in this. They said, I'm not going to pay truck fees in the beginning. I'm just going to go out and buy a 2007 truck right now. And so as a result, pollution at the port in both particulates and criteria pollutants is down over 70%. And we did that in about 4 years. So,
Right, you say the private sector embraced it, but the Teamsters were not happy.
Oh, don't
They
start
pushed
that.
back.
I mean, I'm going to say this because, I listened very carefully to that panel this morning about courage, and I have 2 comments. I could not have said it better than Governor Schwarzenegger. If you can't stand up and you can't do something and you're afraid to lose your office, you should not be there. I couldn't have said it better. And I had a little test on that. I had a test early on in my tenure as mayor. I had the Teamsters who came in, and they wanted both LA and Long Beach to create a program that we would have all the drivers in the ports would become, overnight by the way, would become employees. Now this is a business which has a remarkable number of contractors and owner-operators, and they wanted it to be employees. And quite frankly, they hoped up this reason that it was going to be better for the environment for the driver to be an employee. So yeah, you laugh now, but I had a lot of people that I thought were reasonable, including many in Los Angeles who remain nameless, who actually bought that. And so I said, it has nothing to do with cleaning the air. It's a political issue. I'm not doing it. And quite frankly, I'm not telling somebody who's been in business with maybe with his uncle or his brother has 3 trucks that they're going to be closed down and go work for somebody else. I'm not doing that. And I actually said this. I said, where it is in America, you can't go out and buy a set of tools and try to feed your family. And I didn't. And they came after me. You're right. They did, like 2 weeks of, ads and calls and everything else. But it had the point is, it had nothing to do with clean air. That's what the purpose of this program was, and the hell with the rest of it, to be candid.
Dr. Pachauri, how important is that kind of attitude at a local level?
I think it's absolutely crucial, and I really think what we need is to base actions on knowledge. And an example of this kind, where you set certain benchmarks, would carry a huge lot of conviction, because if you can do it in one city, then clearly this has a major implication for other places as well. So I really think what we need is success stories. And if we were to ensure that you had a success story in a local organization, such a local government such as this, then clearly that has a very powerful impact on other places also. And here, may I say that what Governor Schwarzenegger has done is a remarkable thing, because I think to base this center in a university is to uphold the importance of knowledge. And really speaking, with students being able to pick up, excuse me, to pick up knowledge that's available and essentially act as foot soldiers is an excellent way of of ensuring action.
But there is no national dialogue at the moment. When you received your Nobel Prize and Vice President Gore got his Academy Award as well as a Nobel Prize, shared it with you, unemployment was less than half of what it is today. I was on the floor of the Republican convention when the nominee lampooned, to a certain degree, President Obama's address to the convention 4 years earlier, where he said, "I'm going to heal the earth and I'm going to lower the oceans." Mitt Romney saying, "All I want to do is help you and your family." Economic issues have taken, obviously, root in this campaign. How distressing is it for you that climate change, which you have said, Vice President Gore says, should be the priority issue of our day, is not even mentioned in the campaign?
Well, I think, to be quite honest, there's a lot of disinformation. And to be objective, I think a lot of actions that are required to mitigate emissions of greenhouse gases also have benefits in terms of the economy. I mean, you take an example like Germany. Now, that's a country which is doing better than any other country in Europe, and that's largely because they have really gone very aggressively in using renewable energy, in bringing about improvements in energy efficiency. And all of that has actually led to much higher growth rates than you find in the rest of the world. So, I think it's a bit of a myth to say that if you take action in these areas, you're going to lose jobs, you're going to lose output. It's, to a large extent, just quite the contrary. So this is something that bothers me, that we are really going on the basis of disinformation, which misleads us in not taking the kinds of actions that are required.
Kona, can I comment on that for a minute? As Terry mentioned, I've had a long history in the energy area. I started very early on in the energy efficiency world, and I heard these arguments 30 plus years ago. When we first proposed building standards for residential, non-residential buildings, the first thing people said is, you're going to kill the housing market in California, you're going to make homes unaffordable, people aren't going to be able to buy them, blah, blah, blah. And I said, look, what we're doing is we're actually making structures more affordable because we're looking at their life cycle. What good does it do to put somebody in a house and all of a sudden the utility bills drive them out of it? And as a result of that, what's happened now with 30 plus years of building standards, you heard that California has about half the electrical use that the rest of the nation does. Not entirely from that, but a large measure from it. And we wound up, you actually now, affordability, it's actually more important to have an energy efficient home today. The industry got used to it, understood it, and it was a selling tool. And people, the affordability index actually went up. And then one more point. I'm also chair of the independent system operator, the entity that runs the grid and the electric market in California. Thank the Governor Schwarzenegger. Thanks very much. And I'm the guy responsible for keeping the lights on, so it's really a great gig, let me tell you, especially in this environment. But the point of this is we're implementing the 33% renewable policy, and you get a lot of people saying it's going to kill the economy, renewables are more expensive. Yes, they are slightly more expensive, but they've become much more competitive. But the point of this, you now have a remarkably diverse resource mix in California. It is much more sustainable from any economic problems. And more importantly, as we move on and we move into storage and electric vehicles, this is going to be a much more sustainable economic system here. I drive an electric car, all electric, have for it's almost 11 years. And it's a great storage vehicle. And if you now couple renewables and you move into electric vehicles or even hybrids that run for a substantial amount of time, you are going to have a marvelous system in this state. You have rationalized the system. You charge those vehicles off-peak, and usually at night with wind, and you run solar during the day. You're still going to need gas plants. But the point of this is a stronger economy here in California as a result of that. We're not dependent on coal. We're not dependent on oil. We're not dependent on natural gas. It makes us a much better economic entity by having a variety of resources. So I've heard this economic argument over and over again, and it never made sense to me. And that's why at the local level, when we see things like the port, which is those complexes are the fifth largest port in the world, largest in the country, we just did it because it's a good business decision to do that.
Why haven't more states followed our lead in terms of energy conservation?
Actually, a great number of the states have followed our lead in energy efficiency. You have the same arguments. I think it's still effective in some areas to say, you're going to raise the price of this house by $2,000 by better insulation, better windows, whatever the number is. And they'll look on a chart and they'll say, you're going to kick out 8% of the population from buying this home. And anybody in the finance area knows. Now, what you do now is you look at income and you look at expenses. And if your energy expenses are lower, you have a greater ability to afford a home. That hasn't gotten to some places in the country. To be candid, these should have been national standards. Years and years ago, it was attempted to have a national minimum standards, and that never got off the ground.
Well, the standard you set at the port, should that be national? I mean, one could argue that you've got a standard for the Long Beach port. Do you have the same standard for the Los Angeles port?
Well, Los Angeles has done the same thing. We've done this together. So I would love to see a national standard because people use this as a marketing tool against us. The truth is, everyone's going to have to do it. We've done it first, and I think that will give us an advantage. If I may, let me depart one. That's a good example of a point I wanted to bring up. On the panel this morning, you talked about courage, and you talked about if you're going to get to office, you ought to be able to face adversity. I don't mean to dwell on what's wrong, but what I see, and I see it more acutely as mayor, we have lost our ability to think long term. We used to be a nation that built things, that had capital investment, that had infrastructure. We actually sacrificed some of the things in the present for a better future for our kids and grandkids. We don't do much of that anymore, and this is a great example of it. Well, you're going to hurt yourself in the short run. Absolutely. We're going to take a couple of licks in the short run because I know, and people in the port know, that 10 and 15 and 20 years later, this is going to be a stronger entity and a better entity for our city and our state. And that's what you have to do.
Dr. Pachauri, some would argue the Chinese are thinking long term. They produce more coal than the United States, Japan, and Europe combined. That's not the kind, it gets cleaner coal, but it's not the kind of future that you'd like to see them promote for long term.
Well, let me say that as far as China is concerned, there's now a very serious reappraisal of their development policy. And I wouldn't be surprised if you find that in the next few years, of course, there's going to be a change of government. They will start moving towards much cleaner energy, much greater use of renewable energy, and they are making huge investments in renewable energy devices. But let me also say that as far as the fourth assessment report of the IPCC is concerned, we found that buildings are by far the most attractive sector for reducing emissions of greenhouse gases. And if you were to look at differences between, let's say, the Scandinavian countries and what you have in the colder regions of North America, there's a huge difference. And they haven't lost in terms of employment or economic output. So let me go back to what I said earlier. I think there's need to make sure that information is disseminated in an effective way, and we somehow ensure that some of these very attractive opportunities are highlighted, and we get certainly local government to take some of the initiatives, because that clearly is the best way to move forward.
You have to be somewhat distressed, though, at public opinion surveys that show the number of people who believe that global warming is a problem or that it is man-made is starting to go down, continues to go down.
Well, interestingly, there's a colleague of mine at Yale, Tony Laserowitz, who carries out these regular surveys. And in the last 3 or 4 months, there's clearly a trend upwards in linking climate change with at least some of the extreme events that are taking place. So My feeling is that we probably bottomed out as far as skepticism about climate change is concerned. And you're likely to see a much greater acceptance of the fact that climate change is taking place as a result of human actions. Now, this is purely a supposition. I really have no basis for arriving at this conclusion, but it seems to me that that's going to happen.
Going back to your career, Mayor, in the energy sector and at Southern California Edison, how much on the local and the national and the international level does this entire issue depend on research and development? Institutions like this sticking money into, I don't know, cold fusion, whatever it takes, but making it easier to make the transition.
I think it's essential. It goes along with that long-term view I was talking about. You can look at some of the dramatic reduction in the cost of photovoltaic panels. Part of that is material cost of materials, but part of it is the technology of using a lot less of some basic elements in those PVs. That came through research. And you could point to a number of different areas where research and development is essential. I would also add it's essential on the public policy side, because more and more I see a lot of policy being made and discussed by people who really have almost no understanding about it. It troubles me from the energy side, where I'll see policy discussed and people don't know the difference between a kilowatt and a kilowatt hour, and yet they're advancing, great statements about things. These are really complicated systems, so research is essential. Just to give you one example, when you're trying to put together a 33% renewable portfolio, one of the things that happens is you're using a lot of intermittent power. The cloud comes over, you have a solar array, it gets reduced. You're counting on wind power, the wind doesn't show up. So you need gas-fired plants in California to balance that load. They ramp up and down as that volatility increases. There's almost no understanding of that. And if you don't do this right, you can, under some scenarios, actually increase your emissions and increase your use of natural gas. Now, there's ways to avoid that, but that's lost on a lot of people. So the research, the computer hardware, the research, the weather forecasting is all essential to run this system. They are very complex. So short answer to your question, they're essential.
Research and development is essential. Viterbi School of Engineering is just a couple of buildings down here. You'll get a couple of petroleum geologists there who say that there's 1 billion barrels of oil off the California coast. That would fund, more than anything, the University of California, the second greatest institution of higher learning in Southern California. And so that's when they talk about bridge fuel, everybody got here with a fossil fuel engine. You flew here with a fossil fuel engine. That, yes, at some point, we need to figure out ways to fund the R&D that's going to lead us to the next generation. And right now, we got a ballot measure on the ballot in California. But if it doesn't pass, tuition goes up at the UC CSU system. You're a member of the Board of Trustees.
I was.
Dr. Pachauri, what is your attitude about the idea of bridge fuels?
If you take natural gas, for instance, certainly this is going to be a sort of a bridge fuel. And the fact that you have a lot of shale gas right now certainly gives you some opportunities. But I think we also have to accept that there's lots of other actions that need to be taken in terms of improving energy efficiency, in moving to greater use of renewables, all of which would reduce emissions significantly. I think the basic question is, are we prepared to accept that we've got to reduce emissions of greenhouse gases? If we were to accept that fact, then we can play around with the options that we have available. But I think currently what we have in this country and several other parts of the world is a reluctance to really do something in terms of reducing emissions of greenhouse gases. And I think that's where the skepticism about the science of climate change is clearly coming in the way.
There's an argument to be made that it's more than just reluctance. You're in local government. I talk to people. There's a group called Tree People. They're up on Coldwater at Mulholland. And for 40 years, they've been planting trees all over Southern California. They talk about how they'll go to LAUSD, the second largest school district in the country. They say, we want more trees. And yes, we want to stop paving over schools. We want to figure out ways to put water in the aquifer. Great, great. Then all of a sudden, they lose sight of that. Another school is built downtown LA, nothing but radiation that radiates heat. It's all, and so you can't get governmental entities to agree with each other, even if they agree with the policy. When it comes to actually putting a shovel into ground, all of a sudden there's a disconnect. Have you seen that in Long Beach? I mean, what kind of relationship do you have, say, with the school district or other groups in terms of promoting the kind of conservation that you did at the port?
Actually, an excellent relationship, and I haven't seen that kind of disconnect, at least in Long Beach. I know it exists. I'm not saying it doesn't. But we work not only with the school district, but Cal State Long Beach, the third greatest institution of Ireland, and I'm from San Jose State, so what the heck. They were Spartans, not Trojans. Anyway, hey. I'm a Roman historian. I don't care about either one of them. So. It's the truth. Now I lost my train of thought. No, we connect with Cal State Long Beach and the school. Let me give you one example of how well we work together, and it's a little off topic, but when I ran for mayor, one of the things I wanted to do was to put trades back in the schools, because despite all our best efforts, not everyone is going to go to college and graduate from a four-year university. That's just not going to happen. And we're losing a lot of kids that don't get it. They don't know why they're going to school, and they get really intimidated by college. So I went to the school district and I said, I have an idea. What I want to do is I want to put trade education back in the school, but not just, how to put the round bolt in the red hole, and the round hole, but to talk about the business side of construction, teach all the disciplines, plumbing, engineering, carpentry, electricity, all of it, in a four-year program. And I expected huge resistance. And I expected to actually launch my own charter school. And when I was, in fact, they embraced that, and we now have an ACE program, architecture, construction, engineering at Jordan High School with nearly 400 kids in it, and it's all 4 years. And when I go to the district and tell them I need them to cooperate with us on an environmental issue or the college campus, they are right there. And I think to answer your question and his response on the bridge fuel, I think you look at a number of bridge fuels. The problem is you got to make sure that there's something on the other side of the bridge. And right now we haven't defined that. We need to define a 30-year goal, something very hard in democracies. Define a 30-year goal. There's a lot of ways to get there, and to be candid, there's a lot of ways to get there without harming the economy or harming the middle class or all the other zingers you hear out there in public media.
Dr. Bacharli, in your speech at Oslo, and I won't try to pronounce it, but you referred to an Indian concept that translated in English is the whole universe is one family.
Yes.
And you mentioned that throughout the speech. Anybody from a large family will tell you that sometimes a large family is not one family, because you just have so many varied interests and attitudes. Explain to us why that concept is so important.
Well, you've been going to Tuvalu. It's a small island state which will probably go under the sea before any other place. In our neighborhood in India, we've got the Maldives Islands. Now, even the impacts of climate change in Africa, where, for instance, agricultural yields are likely to go down to about 50% in some countries as early as 2020, only means that there will be refugees from some of these places. There would be all kinds of other problems that would arise. And, essentially, we're all on this planet together. And I think we've reached a stage where anything that happens in one part of the world has major implications for other parts of the world. And therefore, I think it's important for us to see that we're aware of what's going to happen in other parts of the world and how that's going to impact on our well-being and our welfare in the future. So essentially what I'm saying is that we're living in an age where globalization and global movement of people and problems is going to be far more serious than we've seen in the past.
Dr. Pachauri, thank you very much for this. Mayor, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ron.
Global Solutions. I must say, I noticed that Cokie Roberts ended up her panel discussion quoting St. Augustine, which was great because I only thought Jerry Brown quoted ancient Catholic theologians. So in keeping with Governor Schwarzenegger's point earlier that this is all about optimism, there's no pessimism here. I remember Hubert Humphrey, the great senator from Minnesota, once said, "The good old days are never that good. The good new days are today, and better days are coming tomorrow. Our greatest songs are yet unsung." So, Governor, that's for you.
Yeah.
Please thank our panelists again. Thank you. Thank you for excellent. Thank you. I'm Beth Garrett, the provost of USC, and I want to thank you for attending this wonderful symposium. And I would particularly like to extend special recognition to Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, whose vision for this enterprise is aligned so closely with the priorities of USC's strategic vision, and whose energy and support propels us and the Institute forward. Thank you, Governor Schwarzenegger. Governor Schwarzenegger made clear the connection of this institute's vision and our larger strategic goals. In particular, this institute is all about consequential research that applies rigorous scholarly approaches and evidence to the formulation of policy. As Dr. Pachauri just said, what we're about is matching actions with knowledge. As you know, the Institute focuses intently on policy areas where the governor has been involved and played an influential role during his time in office and as a public figure. Areas like climate change and sustainability, stem cell research and healthcare, and education at all levels. But I think the most important focus of this institute is on policy making itself. The various paths through which policies travel, the initiative process, the legislature, administrative agencies, the structures through which people make decisions, the role of political parties and intermediaries that allow people to make their voices heard, but that sometimes distort or stifle them, and the influence that global cities like Los Angeles and other key cities in the Pacific Rim exercise over the future of millions of people. Governor Schwarzenegger's experience in California has also led him to a deep appreciation of the necessity of compromise, the ability to acknowledge deeply held ideological commitments and at the same time understand perspectives and viewpoints of others. When this institute talks about post-partisanship, it does not envision a world without political parties. That world is not realistic and I think would probably work less well than our current situation. It is instead one where multiple voices are heard, both within the parties and from outside them, and where ideology gives way to common ground so we make headway on issues facing our state and our country. Andrew Carnegie once said, "Teamwork is the ability to work together toward a common vision. It is the fuel that allows common people to attain uncommon results." There are a number of reasons why I think this institute will achieve not only uncommon results, but unprecedented ones. First, USC is well positioned to facilitate the Institute's mission, and we have outstanding leadership committed to this mission. You've heard, and it is all true, how outstanding our two leaders, Bonnie Reese and Nancy Stout, are in the leadership of this institute, and I know that they will continue to move us forward in new and interesting ways. And I also want to acknowledge the Institute's Board of Advisors, who's a dedicated group of individuals who have influence and knowledge across various fields and professions. This outstanding core of leadership, together with the governor, puts the Institute on solid ground from the start. The second reason is that USC boasts some of the most talented and influential social science and policy scholars in the world. Some of them are here with us today. They work throughout our university, the Price School of Public Policy, the Marshall School of Business, the Gould School of Law, our Dornsife College, the Rossier School of Education, and many others. These faculty work at the cutting edge of their fields, and they are excited at the collaborative, interdisciplinary work that is promised by this institution. By bringing them together with government, economic, and others leaders, the USC Schwarzenegger Institute will open channels for the practical application of the knowledge we produce here at USC. Third, USC is the most diverse and innovative research university located in the most diverse and innovative city in the world, and this is a powerful resource. Los Angeles is a global nexus of politics, media, economics, and culture, a vibrant space where grand challenges and globalization intersect, where the problems of our day are made visible and where efforts to find solutions are relentlessly pursued. Our strategic vision states, when one ventures into one of the dozens of ethnic communities in Los Angeles or visits our thousands of churches, community centers, and businesses, one experiences a weave of peoples and culture. We live in a century of cities where Los Angeles has a prominent role as home to so many diverse populations from around the globe, and USC sits literally at the center of this new world. And finally, USC has a strong network of engaged supporters. Supporters like the family of Saul Price, who endowed the School of Public Policy, Verna and Peter Dautrieve, whose long support for USC has crystallized in naming the Interdisciplinary Social Sciences building where this institute will be located. Leonard Schaefer, whose generosity supports a team of the best health economists in the world seeking to provide health care efficiently and affordably. And Arnold Schwarzenegger, who's brought us all here today. Supporters like you, who have decided that partisan quibbling only frustrates and disillusions people, and understand that a combination of knowledge, compromise, and collaboration unleashes vast potential that will change our world. Each of you will find at your seat a card that lists the 5 priority areas of the Schwarzenegger Institute. We ask that you complete the information and check off any or all of the areas that you'd like to remain most involved in moving forward. While our expert faculty will certainly identify and study innovative ideas that transcend partisan boundaries, and while the Institute will work with government leadership around the world to put these ideas into action, our greatest successes will come when a multitude of voices work together to think about them from every angle. Your idea might inspire new research or make an elusive connection that persuades policymakers to agree on a solution. You might have the resources to catalyze the translation of our research into a community, lifting a family out of poverty or making the water clean enough to drink. Your involvement and your ideas are vital pillars for this institute's success that support a bridge between great thinking and great action. I encourage you to think about which issues mean the most to you and to join us in action. Don't take a seat on the sidelines. An influential California governor once said, "I welcome and seek your ideas, but do not bring me small ideas. Bring me big ideas that match our future." Governor Schwarzenegger and the University of Southern California still say that to all of us. Bring us your big ideas. Bring your ideas to this institute and this university so that we can provide the analysis that can support consequential ideas that become policies that affect the world. Thank you so much for joining us today. And if you're registered for this afternoon session, please make your way back to the Tudor Campus Center ballroom so that we will start that on time and continue the energy and policy making and thoughtful analysis that is already typified today. Thank you very much.